Hey guys, I'm Kyle, and in today's video, we're going to be taking a look at the original Nintendo 3DS XL. This one here was originally not booting up fully, and upon trying to power it on, you'd hit the power button, a blue light would turn on momentarily, and after a few seconds, it would turn off, and the system wouldn't boot up at all. This 3DS, unfortunately, has been sitting on my unfinished project shelf for the better part of a year and a half. And that's because I couldn't ever really find an explanation for or solution to this problem. However, after a lot of tinkering, I was recently finally able to get the system to power on again. So in today's video, I'm going to show you exactly how I was able to accomplish that. This 3DS XL belongs to my friend Joel, and as you can see, it's now fixed and working again. This 3DS's issue haunted me for a long time, and it turns out that a lot of 3DS XL systems have this same problem, which ultimately makes it even more frustrating when searching online for a possible fix, since I couldn't find a real clear solution. I found all sorts of answers, or theories, about why the system was doing what it was. On the more sensible side, some people said it could be a problem with the battery, and Nintendo's own troubleshooting page said it could be a problem with the system coming out of sleep mode. Others said it could be a bad software update, while others said that it could be an issue with a broken display. But some of the more bizarre theories was that it could be caused by a broken hinge sensor, which isn't actually a thing on these systems. And even more wild than that, some people suggested that blowing into the microphone would cause the system to wake up out of the trance that it's in. I don't know. I can't find a post for that anymore, but I read it on a few different forums and I thought it was pretty crazy and didn't make much sense. So while looking online didn't actually yield a diagnosis, it did give me a place to start, and this all motivated me to make a true troubleshooting guide for this system, since it's obviously so needed by the community. So I'm going to take you through the general steps of how I troubleshooted this 3DS XL and arrived at both the diagnosis and a workable solution. To quickly review, this is basically what it does when you press the power button. The power light comes on for a moment and then just turns off, and the system doesn't do anything else. So I decided to start with troubleshooting the easy stuff first, as you typically should. The system charging light does come on when you plug it in, so it's charging alright, but the console still has the same problem on both battery and while plugged in. So the next easy option was to remove the game cartridge from the top, the SD card from the side, and try it that way. And that yielded the same problem. This is the point where some question online if the problem could be with some kind of sleep sensor, which would control the console going into sleep mode when the lid is closed. Some have speculated that such a sensor is inside of the hinge itself, but that's not the case at all. Sleep mode is actually triggered by way of magnetism down in the base of the unit, instead of the physical switch being flipped, so that's likely not the problem here. I next decided to try a different battery. I unscrewed the two screws on the top of the back panel on the 3DS to get to the battery compartment, and then I pulled up on the two upper corners on the panel to get it loose and pull it away. I was hopeful when putting one of my spare batteries into the system, but unfortunately it still has the same problem. A quick side note, powering on the system on just an AC adapter without a battery won't work, because it requires a battery to boot, so that's not an option for this console. We'll have to dig a bit deeper now, so the next phase of troubleshooting requires us opening the back of the system even more to get to the main system board. You'll have to remove 7 screws from the back panel. There's 4 down here in the main area, and then 2 up top underneath 2 rubber stoppers, and then 1 in the cartridge slot area. Once you start pulling away the back side of the console shell, be careful with the 2 ribbons that are for the shoulder buttons up top. You'll want to carefully detach the connectors on the board so that you don't rip the ribbon cables. Once you've got those out of the way, you'll see two little cards sticking out above the rest of the system board. These are the Wi-Fi card and the infrared or IR sensor. I decided to remove both of these cards since they're relatively easy to disconnect, to see if either of those are somehow faulty. And then I test the system again by pressing a battery to the terminals on the backside of the board and hitting the power button. And again, same problem. So the next logical step was to look around the board to see if there are any scorch marks or bad components anywhere, and I couldn't really find any. I also see that the spill patch in the upper corner of the system board is still intact, so that means that there's no water damage in the system either. So now it's time to break out the multimeter to check some fuses. This check is a bit redundant, and of course these fuses are going to be okay, since they're for the battery power circuit and the charging circuit, and both parts in the system have been confirmed to work. But in the end, it doesn't hurt to check them anyways to make sure everything is kosher. As expected, both fuses check out okay. Since I can't see any problems on the back of this system board, I'll need to take the entire thing out of the console shell to look on the other side of it. Carefully go around the board, removing screws, the joystick, and other components, and unlatching all of the ZIF connectors as I show here. ZIF, spelled ZIF, stands for Zero Insertion Force. This type of connector is widely used nowadays in most consumer electronics. To disengage these connectors, gently use a pair of tweezers to pull up the latch to release the ribbon cable, and it should slide out pretty easily. When repairing or troubleshooting something that involves these kinds of connectors, rule of thumb is to try not to open and close them more than 5 or 6 times, because they're only rated to last for so many uses. And then after that, they're more likely to break, and replacing them is not an easy task. The upper corner of the system board is the most tricky since there are 3 ribbon cables all close together, one of them being on the other side of the board. Be careful not to jerk any of them or pull them out very much, since this could easily tear them and render them unusable. With the 3DS XL system board now out of the clamshell, looking on the back, I can see no issues on the board there either, and everything seems to be intact and in good condition. So since I'm at this point, I decided to do just a really simple test. With just the board with nothing connected to it, I pressed the battery to the terminals on the back of the board and hit the power button, and it actually produces the same exact symptom that I've had through all of these tests so far. Being at this point made me start to think that this problem could be because this board is not detecting certain components being plugged in, or something that connects to it is malfunctioning. And nothing seems fried on the board itself, so this is where I started to suspect that one of the other components in the system is bad. As a side note, way back when I first attempted to repair this system for the first time, I opted to purchase a spare 3DS XL for parts in case I needed it. And this red one that looks like it was violently ripped in half came up at a pretty reasonable price on eBay. Anyways, I was able to confirm this exact same kind of battery activity on my spare red console's board. It is extremely unlikely that these two boards would have the exact same issue. So I next opted to put the board back into the shell and, one by one, started plugging things back in, like the joystick, the Wi-Fi card, the IR receiver, the bottom LCD, and other cables and things. My testing and tinkering eventually led me back to this area up by the hinge, with 3 ribbons all clustered together into this one tight spot. My electronics experience tells me this could very well be a point of failure, since the 3DS opens and closes every time you use the system, and repeated movement like that can cause components to wear out over time. Since I wasn't worried about breaking my red parts console, I decided to open up the top half of it to see if I could identify what all the different cables running from it are for. I opened it up and found the 4 cables I was expecting, the 4th one being the green antenna wire for the Wi-Fi, which has also been torn in half. The ribbon cables themselves are divided amongst 3 different sets of components present in this panel, and despite this panel being broken and the ends of the cables all missing, I was able to identify based on coloring, shape, and trace layout what each of the 3 ribbons are for and which sockets they plug into on the system board. The top smaller connector is for the 3D effect controls, speakers, and the outer pinhole LED for the camera indicator. The top larger one is for just the cameras, the 2-sensor 3D camera on the outer side of the system's clamshell, and the 1 inner camera sensor. The ZIF connector on the bottom of the board is for the ribbon connecting to the top LCD itself, providing power and video signal to it. So I started plugging those ribbons into the board in different combinations until I got one that confirmed my entire theory all along. After hours of troubleshooting and tinkering with the system, I found that it now powers on without the cameras plugged in. What I've theorized and been able to confirm up to this point is that the system doesn't actually check for the cameras to be present when powering on, though it does check for other things. I also believe that the ribbon in the camera module is faulty, and while the system is trying to start with it plugged in, it can't because of a fault, causing it to power off, with the system preventing further damage to itself. I assume that this is some kind of safety feature that's built into the 3DS itself. With all of this in mind, I fully reassembled the 3DS, but this time without the cameras plugged in, and then I tested the heck out of it. Everything actually works great, and it seems like the cameras being disconnected doesn't cause any other issues with the system, which is a really good sign. The only thing that seems to have a problem is the built-in camera app in the 3DS system firmware. It displays an error that it can't start, and then causes the entire system to hard lock when it tries to exit and go back to the home screen. But you can just get around this by forcing a reboot of the entire thing. Overall, I'm super stoked to finally have figured out the problem with this 3DS. I talked with Joel to see what he wants to do about fixing the cameras. Replacement camera modules for the 3DS XL are available all over the place online, but since the system is used and has already suffered from one of the ribbon cables failing, though it is for a non-vital component, I could see the other ribbons possibly failing if I attempted to replace the camera module with a new one. Speaking from experience, I replaced the top LCD on a DSi console recently, and that almost didn't work, because fitting ribbon cables through the hinges on these systems is extremely difficult. At any rate, I just didn't want to risk it, and Joel understands that and doesn't want to deal with an even more broken system that would require replacement parts to fix. So he just opted to not have me do the camera replacement at all. But that doesn't mean that this isn't a success, because at the end of the day, it just goes to show that the 3DS consoles are repairable when they're having issues like this. All in all, I consider this repair a win. Before I go, I want to mention something new that I'm starting with this video. Finding decent reference materials online is sometimes difficult when repairing electronics, game consoles or otherwise. So I've put high-res pictures of the 3DS XL system board into a repository online to help you out. I've put a link to it in the description below. With future videos, I'll be adding even more reference material to this repository, so be sure to check back often. Anyways, thanks for watching. Hit like and subscribe to my channel if you want to see more videos like this in the future. And as always, you all stay awesome, and I'll see you in my next video.